Hello, I'm Asif Farouk of Finextra and we're here at the Swift Business Forum in London, and I'm joined today by Alain Raes of Swift, and we're going to talk about Asia. So Alain, what is happening in the Asia market at the moment?
Let me first perhaps take a step back and explain to you what we do in Asia and how do we see Asia growing and us doing business in supporting the emergence of a very strong financial industry in this country. So Swift is not new in Asia. We've been there for many, many years. We have an office in Hong Kong for 30 years. There are many countries where basically we are celebrating our 30th anniversary of activities in those countries. Bangladesh is going to be one of those with whom we're going to celebrate this in about a few months from now. So we've been there for many years already. We have the experience, but what we are not trying to do is sort of expanding the experience in moving from international trades, international flows, to expanding our footprint into the major domestic markets that you have in that regions. In my major domestic markets, I'm essentially talking about China, Greater China if you like, Japan, India, ASEAN, which is not a single country, as you know, it's actually a group of many countries, but in a way they are forming together a much bigger macroeconomic zone as well. And then you talk about Australia, which is in its own is actually also a very fast developing economy. So what we're trying to do is really building in those countries the sort of infrastructure that will help them to becoming actually fast-growing financial industries.
And what do you think Europe can actually learn from the Asian market?
Well, certainly. I mean, there are certainly experiences that you have in both sides of the fence, if you like, that can be repeated in the other side. When I'm talking about ASEAN, for instance, clearly ASEAN, in the way that they are trying to integrate their economy, in the way that they are trying to build synergies in economies of scale in this country, can learn from the experience that we've had for many years now in Europe. The same way that they can also learn from other experience, similar experience that you have in Africa, for instance, where you have many of those countries that are trying to regrouping their interest to become more powerful together. So certainly there are lessons they can be learning. When it comes to Swift, the same way. I mean, we've been into those domestic markets in Europe for many, many years. As you know, it's now like 20 years nearly that we are supporting the Euro payment systems, the so-called T2. Before that, we've been supporting the emergence of many domestic payment systems. So some way we're trying, if you like, to replicating this sort of success, okay, in Asia as well, and at the same time learning from the mistakes and the success that we've had in Europe in achieving this. So there's certainly things that we haven't done perhaps the right way at the time in Europe that we can do differently in Asia as well. So the other point also that's quite important is that, if you like, Asia has this sort of luxury to start from a much more empty sheet, right? It's not really empty, but you know, it's more empty. And therefore they have also this potential, if you like, to leapfrogging and to come up perhaps more rapidly with systems that will have, from a functional point of view, an advantage to other systems as well. The best example perhaps of this is Brunei, tiny country, small country, but at the same time this is the first one that is really moving to new technologies, new standards, real interactivity and this kind of stuff. And small country, but they're really learning from the experience and from other projects that had been developed before. Some in Asia, but also many of them in Europe and in Africa.
So we hear about this slowdown in the emerging markets. What does this actually mean?
Well, frankly, if you say slowdown moving from 9% growth to 7% growth, really, actually, you will have many countries in Europe and elsewhere in the world that will be more than happy to have this kind of growth rate. I don't really, from a macroeconomic point of view, I don't really know what will be the consequence of this, right? At the same time, as I told you, what we are trying to achieve is getting into the domestic footprints, right? And whether we like it or not, right, the real growth is happening there. You know, when everybody is talking about global growth, global macroeconomy and all that, but the reality is that still today, if you look at the worldwide level, most of the trades, most of the activities are actually domestic activities, and we see that growth will stay there. And the good news also when it comes to Asia is that yes, perhaps some countries like China will move from 7 or 8 to back to 6%. India was at 7, or is back to more like 2 or 3, and perhaps will go back to another higher level of growth. But the good news also is that you have no new relay of growth as well, like Indonesia, right? Or the Philippines, or countries like Cambodia or Myanmar that are perhaps smaller, but over time will represent major potential for future growth for the region as well. So I'm not necessarily worrying about having perhaps China, growing at a smaller pace. The good news is that you have new relays of growth as well.
And with JASDAQ moving to the ISO 20022 standard, what does this mean for Japan? And also, can you talk about what's happening with SWIFT India at the moment?
Let's start with Japan, if you don't mind. So Japan migration to 2022, we're talking about the CSD of the country that is now implementing this new generation of standards that has been developed by SWIFT already many years ago. The good news is that you have already in the world many of those implementation. Perhaps some of the most visible ones are in Europe with the SEPA implementation that is really coming to fruition at this point of time. You have T2S, which is another one that will go live in about 18 months from now. When it comes to Asia, the other good news is that you have certainly as many of those initiatives throughout the regions. Perhaps the most recent one and the most visible one is precisely JASDAQ that is moving to the 2022 and also at the same time offering a SWIFT access to its system, and which is really good news for all the banks in the world that have really international activities and therefore being able to reuse their technology, their standardization to deal with the JASDAQ processes as well. So it's about Japan. I think it's a good news because it's also a sign for Japan that it's opening up its markets to the rest of the world, which is really good news. When it comes to India, it's a bit of a different game, right? India is there also trying to opening up its financial industry, its markets to the rest of the world. Until quite recently, SWIFT didn't really have any activities domestically in the country. Yes, India as a country is being connected to the SWIFT network for many years. Many banks in India are connected to SWIFT for many years, but essentially for international trade purposes, right? Here we are in a venture with 9 of the largest Indian banks creating together with us a JV that will be supporting the emergence of new payment systems and security systems domestically in the country. So we are, at this point of time, developing this. The good news and perhaps the really new approach we have is that in this context, we are developing 2 operating centers in India that will be dedicated to handling only the transactions that are happening domestically in that country. That is deemed to go live by the end of this year.